Section 7 of Advice to Young Men and Boys. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Advice to Young Men and Boys by Benjamin Comegys. William Penn, October 22, 1882. In the early autumn of the year 1682, a vessel with her bow pointing towards the west was making her way slowly across the Atlantic Ocean. She was a small craft, rigged as a ship, and crowded with emigrants. The discomforts of a long and tiresome voyage, the very small accommodations, the horror of seasickness, were in this vessel aggravated by the breaking out of that most awful of all scourges, the smallpox. In a very short time, out of a population of 100, 30 passengers died. No record is left of the incidents of that voyage except this, but it is easy to imagine that all the circumstances were as deplorable as they could well be. After a weary time of headwinds and calms, in about 7 weeks, this ship, the Welcome, came within the capes of the Delaware Bay. The most distinguished person on that little ship was William Penn. He had left his home in England, embarking with his trusty friends in a vessel only 1/10 the size of the ships of our American line, to come to Pennsylvania. He had bought the whole province from the government of England for the sum of 16,000 pounds sterling, which, measured by our money, is about $80,000. And this money was due to him for services rendered and money loaned to the government by his father, an admiral in the English Navy. About the 24th of October, the vessel reached the town of Newcastle, where Penn landed and was cordially received by the people of that little village. Afterwards, they came farther up the river to Uplands, now the town or city of Chester. Then, leaving the vessel here, they came in a barge, Penn and some of his principal men, to the mouth of Dock Creek, the foot of what is now known as Dock Street, where they landed, near a little tavern called the Blue Anchor. There was already a settlement on the shore of the Delaware River, and the people, mostly Swedes, had built a little church somewhat farther down the stream. The entire land between the Delaware and Schuylkill rivers, and for a mile north and south, was owned by 3 brothers, Swedes, named Sven. Penn bought this tract from them, and at once proceeded to lay out his new city. When he bought the whole province from the crown, he desired to call it New Wales, because it was so hilly, but the king insisted on calling it Pennsylvania, in memory of the admiral, William's father. But when the new city came to be named, Penn, having no one to dispute his wish, called it by that word of whose meaning we think so little, Philadelphia, brotherly love. 2 months after this, he met the Indians, it is said, under a great elm tree in the upper part of the city, in what we now call Kensington, and concluded that treaty which has been said to be the only treaty that was ever made without an oath, and that was never broken. Shortly after this, Penn proceeded to lay out the city, and, as a distinguished English author has said, he must have taken the ancient Babylon for his model, for this was the first modern city that was laid out with the streets crossing each other at right angles. The charter which Penn received from Charles II, King of England, the original of which is in the Capitol at Harrisburg on 3 large sheets of parchment, made him proprietary and governor, also holding his authority under the crown. He at once, therefore, set about making a code of laws as special statutes, which, with the common law of England, should be the laws of the province. One of these special laws was this: everyone, rich or poor, was to learn a useful trade or occupation, the poor to live on it, the rich to resort to it, if they should become poor. And I do not know what better law he could have enacted. When the news of Penn's arrival and cordial reception reached England and the continent of Europe, The effect was to arouse a spirit of emigration. Although Penn's first thought and purpose was to found a colony, where he and others who held the religious views of the Society of Friends might worship without hindrance, which liberty was denied them in England, the people from other countries in Europe came here in great numbers for other purposes. The population therefore multiplied rapidly, and the people were generally such as had determined to brave the privations of a new country, to make themselves a home where life could be lived under better conditions than in the old countries, under the harsh government of tyrannical kings. This immigration was stimulated also by the very liberal terms which the governor offered to newcomers. For to actual settlers he offered the land at about $10 for 100 acres, subject, however, to a quit rent of $0.25 an acre per annum forever. And this may be the origin of that ground rent instrument which is almost peculiar to Pennsylvania, and which is such a favorite investment for our rich men. After a stay of 2 years, Penn returned to England, where he had left his wife and children, the care of the government having been left with a council, of which Thomas Lloyd was president, who kept the Great Seal. Not long after his return to England, the king, Charles II, died, and having no son, he was succeeded by his brother, James, Duke of York, as James II. Although Penn was on the most cordial terms with the new king, as he had been with Charles, this did not secure him from the repeated annoyances and persecutions of those who detested his religion. So severe was the treatment to which he was subjected, and such was his personal danger from unprincipled men, that he escaped to France. But not being able nor willing to bear this exile, he returned to England, was tried for his offense against the law of the Church, and was acquitted. After this he came to America again, intending to spend the rest of his life here, but he remained only 2 years. The rest of his life was spent in England, but it was a life broken by persecutions and trials at law and other annoyances, the expenses of which, added to the losses by the unfaithfulness of his stewards, were so great as seriously to involve him in financial embarrassments, and he was even compelled to mortgage his great estate in Pennsylvania to relieve himself. But the interest annually payable on such encumbrance was so heavy that he felt the necessity of relieving himself of the property entirely, and he offered to sell it to the crown. While the matter was under consideration, his health began to decline. However, the terms were agreed upon, but while the papers were in the course of preparation, he died peacefully at Ruscombe in Buckinghamshire, July 30, 1718, and was buried 5 days after in the burial ground belonging to Jordan's Meeting House. Such is the briefest outline of the life of the founder of this Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and of this city of Philadelphia. Let us see now what there was in this life which we may find it interesting to recall and dwell upon, what there was in it which may be useful for us to consider in its application to ourselves. William Penn was born in the city of London on the 14th of October, 1644, in the parish of St. Catherine's, near the Tower. His father was an admiral, and his grandfather was a captain in the English Navy. Then, as now, it was the custom of English families of good condition to send their boys away from home to school. This boy, an only son, was therefore sent to a school near the town of Wanstead in Essex, called Chigwell. Here he remained until he was 13 years old, with no incident particularly worthy of notice, except that he was, at the age of 12, brought under deep religious impressions, which, however, like many other boys, he soon threw aside. He seems to have been apt to learn, and was fond of the childish sports belonging to his age. For 2 years after leaving school, he was under private instruction at home until he was 15 years old, when he entered the University of Oxford. Here he devoted himself most diligently to his studies, and became a successful student. But this did not prevent him from entering most heartily into the sports which were common to young men of his quality. He was very fond of boating, fishing, shooting, and other pleasures, and he was extremely handsome, but he avoided dissipation of all kinds, thus proving that the keenest enjoyment of healthful sports is quite consistent with a pure life. If the college students of this day would believe and act upon this principle, it would be better for them and better for the world. With this hearty enjoyment of sports, and this diligent application to study, he had a very tender sympathy and love for domestic animals. Towards those that were the most helpless, he evinced a kindliness that was almost womanly. But he had a strong will, and it was impossible to turn him aside from a course of duty when he was satisfied that it was real duty. During his school and college life, there were many seasons of religious interest in his experience, and he was at last brought, under the preaching of a member of the Society of Friends named Thomas Lowe, to declare himself a member of that society. He therefore refused to attend the services of the Church of England. The custom of wearing surplices by Oxford students, which had been abolished in Cromwell's time, had been restored by Charles, but Penn, when he came out as a religious man, threw off his surplice and refused to wear it. This act was bad enough in the eyes of the authorities, but his zeal went further than this, and, in common with some others of the same way of thinking, he so far forgot himself as to attack other students and tear off their surplices. This very grave offense could not be overlooked, and, admiral's son though he was expelled from the University of Oxford. This was a great blow to his father, who was building the fondest hopes on the advancement of his son at college and his career as a courtier. No persuasion, however, could induce the son to reconsider his conduct, and his father at last flogged him and drove him from the house. Some time after this, through the intercession of the mother, the young man was brought back to his home, and his father, in the hope that a change of scene and circumstances would work a change in the lad's feelings, sent him to Paris and to travel on the continent. While in Paris, he studied the French language, and read some books in theology, and went as far as Turin in Italy, from whence, however, he was recalled to take charge of a part of his father's affairs. He then studied law for a year, which no doubt was of some help to him in the founding of his commonwealth. Then his father sent him to take care of his estates in Ireland, at that time under the viceroyalty of the Duke of Ormond. He entered the army here, and did good service too, and was apparently so much pleased with his new life that he suffered the only portrait of him that was ever painted to be taken while he was wearing armor and in uniform. This picture, or a copy of it, may now be seen at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, in Spruce Street, above 8th. About this time he came again under the influence of the preacher Lowe, and was recalled by his father, who remonstrated with him on his new mode of life, but with no success whatever. He would not give up his new religion. His father tried to compromise the matter with him, and he even went so far as to propose to his son that if he would remove his hat in the presence of the king and the Duke of York and his father, as his superiors, their differences might be healed. But the son, believing that the removal of his hat would be dishonorable to God, absolutely refused. His life for some time after this was stormy enough. He came out boldly and in defiance of law as a preacher of the Society of Friends, and was repeatedly imprisoned, sometimes in the Tower of London, and sometimes in the loathsome prison of Newgate, from which places he was released by the intercession of the Duke of York and his father and other friends. Those were very rough times, not likely, let us hope, to be repeated. Society was very corrupt at the highest sources, and religion was more violent and aggressive in its measures then than now. The world has grown wiser and better. There is more toleration, more of the spirit of the Master now than then, and in our favored land every soul can worship God as he may choose to do. William Penn was a statesman. He founded this great commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He established a code of laws that were in advance of his time. He stipulated that the law of primogeniture, that law which gives the lands of the father to the oldest son, with little or no provision for younger sons, that law which is the cornerstone of the crown of England, should have no place in this new commonwealth. The property of a parent dying without a will should be equally divided among his children. Penn was a statesman in the broadest sense of the term. His laws were for the greatest good of the greatest number. He treated the Indians as if they were human beings, and not as if they were brute beasts. Indeed, he never treated the brutes as the Indians have been treated even in our day by harsh and unscrupulous agents of the government. Whether he was exactly just in his dealings with Lord Baltimore, the settler of Maryland, I do not know. Perhaps he was not. We know this misunderstanding gave him great trouble, and was indeed the prime cause of his return to England. Penn was a rich man. The inheritance left him by his father was handsome, and he could have lived most comfortably upon it. But when he received from the crown the charter which made him the owner of Pennsylvania, he was the largest landowner, except sovereigns, known in history. He did not use his wealth for personal indulgence, or for luxurious living for himself or his family. He believed that he held his property as a trustee, and that he had no right to waste it. He might have lived the life of an ordinary English nobleman, for it is said his father was offered a peerage, but such a life had no charms for him. Penn was a conscientious man. I mean by this that he followed his inner convictions without regard to consequences. What he wanted to know was whether a given thing was right, and according to his way of determining what the right was, and he did it if it were a duty without flinching. No personal inconvenience, no consideration for the views or wishes of other people was allowed to stand in the way of his duty as he understood it. It was the custom of that time for gentlemen to wear swords, as some gentlemen now carry canes, with no purpose except as ornament or part of the dress. Some time after he joined the Society of Friends, and while still wearing his sword, he said to his friend George Fox, "Is it consistent with our principles and our testimonies against war for me to wear my sword?" When Fox replied, "Wear thy sword as usual, so long as thy conscience will permit it," this friendly rebuke led him to lay aside his sword, never to resume it. William Penn was a religious man. He was called by the Holy Spirit at the early age of 12 years, as I have already said. He resisted that call, and many others, until, under faithful preaching, he could resist no longer, when he yielded himself to the divine call and became an open professor of the principles of the Society of Friends. This was a very different thing, so far as personal comfort was concerned, from professing religion in the ordinary forms, for this was to join a hated sect and bear all the contempt and persecution that belonged to a profession of religion in the early days of Christianity, when men, women, and children periled their lives in the service of the great master. But Penn cared not for the cost. He was ready to go to prison, and to death if necessary, for his opinions. He did go to prison over and over again, and bore right manfully all that was put upon him. He was not idle, however, in the prison. He preached to his fellow prisoners. He wrote pamphlets. He did everything in his power to make known to others the good tidings of salvation that had come to him. He wrote a great many letters, and they were all full of the spirit of religion. He wrote treatises on religious truth that might have been written by a systematic theologian. But among the most practical things he wrote was the address to his children, that it would be well if all people would read, and which, with a few exceptions, is as appropriate for the people of today as it was for those who lived 200 years ago. If Penn had not been a religious man, his life had not been worth recording. He would have lived the life that was lived by almost all men of his class at that time, a life of unrestrained worldliness and luxury. The Almighty, who had great purposes in store for the New World, to be wrought out by the instrumentality of man, could have chosen another man, but he chose Penn. Such is the story of the life of a man who was one of the world's heroes. His name will never die. There is a large literature on the subject of his life, some of which you will find in your own library if you choose to look further into it. This is all that I feel it proper to say to you today about it. Boys, it is a great thing to have been born in Pennsylvania as all of you were, and this can hardly be said of any other congregation in this city today. This is a great commonwealth. As to its size, it is, leaving out Wales, nearly as large as the whole of England. As to great rivers and mountains and mines and metals, as to forests and fields, we are far in advance of anything of the kind in England. No valleys on earth are more beautiful or more productive than the valleys of our own Pennsylvania. It is a great thing, boys, to have been born in the city of Philadelphia, as most of you were. It was founded by a great and good man. There are, in the civilized world, but 3 cities that are larger than ours. There is no city except London that has so many dwelling houses, and there is none anywhere in all the world where the poor man who works for his living can live so happily and so well. In this state, in this city, your lot is cast. You will soon, many of you, take your place among the citizens, and have your share in choosing the men who make and execute the laws. Some of you will be the men who make and execute the laws. William Penn founded this commonwealth not only to provide a peaceable home for the persecuted members of his own society, but to afford an asylum for the good and oppressed of every nation. And he founded an empire where the pure and peaceable principles of Christianity might be carried out in practice. When you come to take your part in the duties of public life, see to it that you forget not his wise and noble purpose. End of section 7. Read by John R. Moore, Albertville, Alabama, July 2023.